are.
Hi, welcome to A Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry. And this week we are talking about what does
life, the
universe, everything.
Can you read?
No. Yeah. Tell us about God. I didn't see it down there.
It's right underneath there.
Oh, okay. It's right there at the bottom. Down here at the bottom.
Yes.
Just read. So anyway, this is Robin. I'm Ruth. This is Oreo, our other co-host.
Wonder Dog.
Yes. And anyway, so we are here to discuss this topic and answer any questions people have. If you have any questions, comments, or show ideas, please put them in the comments, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube. We can see both chats live. And we're getting some like blue speckles in our picture. We're not sure why. So we're just saying that it's snowing in our studio today. So we're getting blue snow. So enjoy the blue snow, and hopefully our topic will be of interest to you. Yeah. So we run the show in 10-minute segments. So at the end of the 10 minutes, that is when I will read your comments or your questions. So, go ahead and introduce our topic.
Okay. Well, the phrase, life, the universe, and everything, comes out of Douglas Adams'
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
And the answer to that, according to the Deep Thought computer, was 42. But that's not what we'll be talking about today at all. Instead, what we want to talk about is can we learn something about God from life, the universe, and everything? That is there more to learn about God than just what you see in the Bible? Now, theologians have technical terms for the Bible versus everything that there is. Some theologians have questioned whether or not we can learn anything at all about God from the universe around us. Special revelation is the technical term that theologians use to describe the information that we gain about God from the Bible. That is, God has specially revealed himself to the human race through the biblical materials and also from the indwelling Holy Spirit, and when Jesus was here on earth, and of course direct contact with the divine there. All those things are classified as special revelation, prophets receiving information directly from God and then sharing it with people. That would be thought of as being special revelation as well. General revelation, or what's sometimes called natural revelation, refers to everything else. It is history, science, human interactions, that is everything else that goes on in God's universe. The argument goes that we can learn something about God from that, just as you learn something about an artist from studying his or her poetry, writings, or art, or music. It is you learn something about that individual as a consequence of what they have produced. You learn something about a workman from the quality of the things that he has manufactured. You learn something about the Yugo, and that tells you something about the society from which it came. That may be something that our younger viewers will have no idea what we're talking about when we mention the Yugo. We actually knew somebody that had a Yugo.
Yes. You can always Google it, though, if people don't know
Yes,
what
people
it is.
could Google it.
Spelled Y-U-G-O.
Right. And it was made in Yugoslavia, which is a nation that no longer exists as well. Probably no Yugos exist except perhaps as static displays somewhere.
No movies have been made with them.
Really?
Like, you've got the DeLorean, which
Right.
was a
Poorly made car.
And it's super famous from the Back to the Future movies. But you don't see the Yugo being made into a time machine or anything like that.
Well,
I mean, it wasn't even...
It's misnamed. Because
Right.
you don't go if you have a Yugo.
Right, but at least in like Wayne's World, he had was it an AMC Pacer or was it Gremlin?
I do not recall.
I forget. It was either a
Another
Pacer or a
notoriously
Gremlin.
bad car.
Yeah.
So you learn something about AMC, which is a manufacturer that doesn't exist anymore. Learn something about Yugos and their manufacturer, and even the whole country it came from doesn't exist anymore. The East German Trabant is a notoriously bad car, and so that tells you something about East Germany, again, a country that doesn't exist. And Trabants, there's probably some around. And there's a market for notoriously bad cars. That is, people like to collect the weird. And so some people will be attracted to cars that are not so good.
It also tells you what socialist and communist countries can produce as far as
Quality.
Yeah. So, I mean, Cuba, they don't even make cars, and they
don't import them from anywhere.
Yeah, so their people are
keeping the old 50s and 1950s versions of American cars running.
Yes. So they're putting them together with duct tape and whatever they've got to keep them running.
Keep them running, yep. So anyway, the argument from theologians is that likewise we can learn something about God from the nature of the universe around us. And the biblical material. Now, having said that, there are those theologians, and actually a fairly famous one, that was very skeptical about what he would call natural theology or general revelation. That was Karl Barth. To some extent, he's reacting against how natural theology or general revelation, in his view, is misused by those leaders both in the church and in the government of Germany to lead the country into World War I. And he found the war appalling, and he found the justifications for the war, which was based on the misuse of general revelation, appalling, and so he reacted entirely negatively against general revelation as a consequence. The problem, though, of course, from the idea of completely rejecting it is that the Bible does seem to embrace it to some extent. That is, you have the famous passage in Psalm 19 that most people are familiar with. The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they have no words, no sound is heard from them, yet their voice goes out into the earth, their words to the ends of the world. And so you have a sense there of God being able to reach out to humanity simply from his creation. Paul, in the beginning of the book of Romans, also seems to argue that people are without excuse, that they learn something about God from the world around them and what he expects of them. Now, having said all of this, we do have to acknowledge that there are weaknesses to both general and special revelation. That is, just as the Bible does not tell us everything there is to know about God, likewise, we cannot learn everything there is to know about God from the universe around us. Now, it sometimes surprises some Christians to hear that the Bible does not have answers to all the questions they might have, because people would really like it if God had answered every possible question that we have, and there it is hidden someplace in the biblical materials. The Bible's a really big book. A lot of people haven't read the whole thing, and so they like to think there's stuff hidden there that they can find. Sad to say, you will never be able to go to the Bible and find a way to get your printer to work. It is not going to give you any help or aid whatsoever in getting it to work. It may give you some comfort, along the lines that, God, works in mysterious ways. God does what he wants to do with the universe, that sort of thing. But you have nothing there telling you how to get it to function. You're just stuck. Likewise, the book of Ecclesiastes, I would argue part of its purpose is to demonstrate the weakness of general revelation, that is, life, the universe, and everything. Because as we look at Ecclesiastes, he ends up in a very bleak place. His conclusion in that book is that meaningless, everything is meaningless, or depending on your translation, vapor, everything is vapor. I think King James had vanity, which is kind of an older English word, but meaningless is what's used in modern translations usually. And the reason for his conclusion is that as he looked at the universe and how it behaved, he found it rather capricious. That is, bad things that happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. There seemed to be no rhyme nor reason to what happens. You don't seem to actually be able to control the outcome of your life. The author of Ecclesiastes makes the statement that time and chance happens to everyone. So there are limits to what the universe can tell us. But there are some key things that we do learn from the universe. One of the things, of course, what you see expressed in Psalm 19, the glory of God, the power of God. That is, if you assume God exists, then you assume God is responsible for the creation of the universe, and that took a lot of work. It's not something that we, at this point in our technological development, have the capability of doing, creating our own universe. But it's something God did, and so that's rather a remarkable event.
Well, just the fact that everybody stays alive on this ball is pretty amazing. Because,
yes, given how thin it is, the atmosphere.
Well, and not just that, but the biosphere, they tried to create the different climates of the planet.
Explain what the biosphere is.
Oh, biosphere was an experiment done back, it started in the 80s or the 70s?
90s.
90s, okay, in Arizona. It's now run by Arizona State University. Or
one of the universities, anyway.
Yeah, the one that's in Tucson. But anyway, what they were trying to do was early experimentation for colonizing the moon or Mars or any other
to
planets.
create a self-contained environment.
Right. That would be it would be sustainable. Like it would have the weather and the things it needed in order to water itself and kind of like living in a terrarium, but a lot more complex.
Because the Earth as a whole is a self-contained environment. That is, we don't have to import air from someplace else. It renews itself.
Right.
You don't have to import water, it renews itself. And so they're trying to create that in a very small space, which is what you'd have to do if you're creating a colony someplace else.
So they put some scientists in there to live there for a period of time to see how it was, and they became very, very sick and had to be removed. And then the other thing that happened too was the trees fell over. The trees got to a point in height where they fell over, and they discovered because there was no wind inside the biosphere, the trees weren't strong enough to stay standing because they hadn't had to resist anything. So wind actually keeps trees stronger, and which has also been used as a metaphor for making your children's lives too easy, that if they don't have enough challenge in their life that they will collapse when they get older. But anyway, so it was kind of fascinating to watch what failed in it. It is still open. They used to give tours. I don't know if they still do.
I'm not sure if they still do,
still
but
running,
back when we visited it a couple times, you could go through it and they would talk about what they were trying to, or what they had been trying to do. And of course, they learned a lot from the failure. That is, they learned what they hadn't done right, things they hadn't anticipated. For instance, one of the things they hadn't anticipated was the concrete letting off a bunch of gases and other bad stuff. They hadn't anticipated that issue. There are just a number of things they hadn't thought of before. And so as a consequence, they actually gained some information and knowledge, but they were not able to create a self-contained environment that worked. This is not to say that somebody won't eventually manage to do so.
Right.
It's just
Well,
that it's hard.
Right, and technology is more advanced now too, so it was still pretty
it's
primitive
30
technology.
Yeah, it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's a long time. A lot of things have changed in that time frame.
Yeah, but it is fascinating. I have a VHS tape. We bought it over there.
Yes.
About the biosphere, and I have a book about it, and it's a fascinating project. So.
Yes. So, what we can learn about God from life, the universe, and everything, it tells us something about his nature. For instance, the fact that things do seem somewhat random and we can't control our lives would indicate that God allows the problems and turmoil and the suffering that happen in the world, and that his existence is not incompatible with that. Some atheists look at, say, the level of suffering in the universe and think that that demonstrates that there cannot be a God. Christians, in response, have come up with all sorts of explanations to try to reconcile the problem. The difficulty, though, on both sides is the atheist conclusion that suffering precludes the existence of God is essentially a argument from ignorance. That is, because Christians usually do not have good answers for the problem, they conclude therefore their answer is the right one, and you can't do that. It's akin to a Christian asking a scientist, well, what caused the Big Bang? There's theories, but nobody knows. And then a Christian will say, see, that proves God exists. No, it doesn't. Again, you're arguing from ignorance. That is, just because, say, if I ask you what's 2 plus 2, and you're stupid and you say, well, I don't know. Then I tell you the answer is 5. Well, I'm just as wrong. It is simply because I propose an answer to the problem does not necessarily mean I've got the right answer, just because you don't have the right answer. So no, suffering does not preclude the existence of God. It's simply one of many things that we don't have an answer to. Now, suffering is more immediately unpleasant and bothersome to us than not understanding, say, all the ins and outs of quantum physics. But our inability to explain quantum physics does not mean that modern physics is completely wrong, nor does it mean that God exists or doesn't exist. It just means we don't have an answer to that particular problem.
Right. So I looked up the biosphere. Yes, it is open. Not at the moment, but like tomorrow it opens at 9 a.m. And it's in Oracle, Arizona, and which is just outside Tucson, and it's University of Arizona that runs it. And the root beer is really good, but the sandwiches were a bit dry, one of the commenters said. So I recommend the root beer. Yes, I recommend the root beer. Whoa, we just went out of focus. Okay, there we go. You shifted and it went out of focus. Yeah,
reacted to that.
So, but Lucy Lens briefly. I looked 10 years younger for a moment there. But anyway, so I recommend the root beer, not the sandwiches.
Right.
Bring your own sandwiches, I guess, is the lesson to be learned there. So.
Okay.
Anyway.
You decide to go visit.
Yes.
And so everything that happens in life, life, the universe, and everything gives us some insights into God. Is the Bible, and particularly when you combine that with what the special revelation of God tells us, that is, those two things working together can give us a lot of insight into things. One of the errors that Christians at least will make in their desire to understand and know God, and it's reasonable that they would read the Bible because you get a lot of direct information about him there, But you should not shy away from learning history, learning psychology, learning just everything you possibly can, because everything that you come across can give you some insight into things. The world around us is not just fodder for pastors to use to illustrate their sermons. That is, telling stories about their children or whatever and using that as an illustration. The reason it can be used as an illustration is because life does tell us stuff. Mm-hmm. You learn some things. It helps you make sense of things. Going back to special revelation, one of the things that Jesus does all the time in the New Testament when he's teaching, he doesn't expound on, academic levels of theology. He would tell stories. And the reason for that is most of us are not enthralled by the academic. That is, we sleep through the academic. And Jesus did not want his audience to be sleeping. And so he tried to tell stories that would engage his audience.
Sorry. I am really tired today. It was a long week of school, but
okay.
And I didn't get enough sleep, but I was just pretending for humor.
Yes.
Telling stories.
Yes, telling stories is part, and that's what the biblical materials do to a large extent, is they tell stories. I've commented before that the core of the Bible, that is what everything hangs on, is the one commandment to love your neighbors yourself, or to do to others you'd have them do to you. What the Bible then does is illustrate how that would work in various situations. Because as you live in life, the universe, and everything, that simple phrase is hard to put into practice or figure out how to put it into practice. It is, as you face your commute on Monday morning going to work, it may be difficult to keep that thought in your head as you have to deal with other drivers. It may be hard to keep it in your head as you have to deal with your boss or your coworkers or fellow students or whatever it is that you're engaged in, or if you go to fast food to get your meal and then they don't do it right, or you order something online and then they deliver it to the wrong house.
Yes.
All sorts of things can go wrong.
That never happens.
Yes, that never happens.
To anybody
ever. Yes, just on Friday. Or no, was it Friday?
No, it wasn't
Thursday.
yesterday, yeah.
Thursday it was, yes.
Have you gotten notification that
No,
they're redelivering?
nothing at all. I have heard absolutely nothing.
Interesting.
As far as when I look at the orders, it just tells me that it was delivered on Wednesday or Thursday, whenever it was. And it was delivered, just not to my house. I mean, they actually took a picture of it sitting on some stranger's porch. It's not my porch, but there's the package sitting on somebody's porch.
If we knew whose porch it was, we could go get it, but
yeah,
then we would get accused of stealing off somebody's porch.
perhaps.
But it's LA. It's LA County. You can steal anything you want, and as long as it doesn't go over $950,
yeah, it's only about a $25 thing.
See,
so
we'll get away with it.
Yes.
Just wave at the camera and go, "Hi, this is my package."
Yeah, it's got my name on it.
Yeah.
And my address.
Here's my ID.
Oh, well, sad. But life is a series of difficulties and complexities, and it's hard. And from the hardness of it, not just from the pleasant parts of it. And see, the thing is, we don't pay attention to the pleasant parts as much. Mm-hmm. It is the hard things are what will stick in our heads. It's what leads all the news. It's a good idea to get away from the news as much as you can because, well, for one thing, with the Serenity Prayer, and see, this is the other thing, literature from all sorts of people can also give you insight. It's not just what you would read in the Bible. You can get something out of everything because human beings, according to the special revelation, have been created in the image of God. Therefore, and it's a derived conclusion, what people have to say can sometimes reflect the divine. And so it can be useful to do that. And so the Serenity Prayer by a theologian named Niemöller suggests that, we need to be able to tell the difference between those things that we can control and those things that we can't, those things that we can change and those things that we cannot change, and to learn to learn the difference. And that can give us some serenity. The idea behind Niemöller's poem is not just you lie down and take whatever horrible thing happens to you, but rather that you learn what you have control over versus what God has control over. And some things you just have to leave up to God. Mm-hmm. And it also means that sometimes you will not understand what's happening. It won't make sense any more than quantum physics makes sense to most of us. It's just the things that happen to us in life oftentimes hurt. Quantum physics usually doesn't, unless you're in a class taking a test, and tests can be painful. But under normal circumstances, your lack of understanding of quantum physics will cause you no difficulty in your life at all. And that's the problem with most things that we don't understand. They're neither here nor there. But things that are painful, they are. But that being said, again, going back to the news and not letting it get you down, it's outside of your control. Mm-hmm. That is, there's not a whole lot you can do unless you happen to be in a position of power. In which case, then you can do something about it, maybe. Oftentimes, even then, things are beyond your control. That is, if a hurricane is coming down on Haiti, there's not a whole lot you can do except pick up the pieces afterwards. You're not going to be able to prevent it or control it or make it any less devastating. So those sorts of things do give us information about God. Any thoughts?
No.
Just sitting there hugging the dog.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you.
Not letting me do it all. Goody.
Uh-huh.
Any questions from anybody?
Nope.
Nothing, huh?
We're showing a second viewer, so hopefully
that's good.
We have somebody listening that will participate. I got nothing.
You got no thoughts at all, huh?
No.
That's odd.
My head is a vacuum.
Huh, that's unusual.
But.
Huh. Okay.
So why, okay, here's a question. Why is the universe so big? What does that tell us about God?
Well, it tells us that, gives us an idea about God's power and abilities. It does raise all sorts of questions. Like one of the questions that can be raised is, is the size of the universe just because God was showing off, mm-hmm. or is it because it's in some way necessary for the universe to be this size? It is, when you think in terms of, say, things that we manufacture, I mean, cups are the size they are because that's convenient for human beings, given the size of their hands, to hold. Back in the day, most people today would have no idea, our children would not understand it, the 3.5-inch floppy disks that computers used to use. The reason they were that size is because they would fit in a shirt pocket.
Oh. Yeah, the 5 1/4s were not.
No, and the 8-inch before that.
Mm.
That they were made the size they were because...
And the really big ones were really easy to damage.
Right.
Because they were really flimsy plastic.
Yeah, they didn't have a hard shell.
Right.
And so things are designed, that is, when human beings make things, they make things the size that they need to be for the function that we are making them for.
Right. And now we've moved to the cloud because people keep losing pictures, data, that kind of stuff when their disks would fail and their hard drives would fail and
of course,
all that.
what we're doing
But I know
is
some people still use thumb drives.
Yes.
So,
they can be useful sometimes for transferring information.
It's easier to do it using the cloud.
Yes, it is. And of course, all the cloud is other people's hard drives elsewhere.
Yes, but they're backed up regularly.
And the massive.
There's a lot of redundancy, and the odds that you'll lose your stuff is pretty slim.
Yeah, the redundancy is much greater.
I mean, us just having external hard drives, the various terabyte hard drives, 1 and 2 terabyte hard drives, I've lost so much stuff on there because they fail.
Yeah,
they fail really quickly.
Unfortunately.
And I've spent a lot of money on them, and it was pointless.
Yeah, the quality's kind of bad, at least on the ones we got. Mm-hmm. And it's 2 different major manufacturers that you hear good things about, but not so much.
Yep.
So, why is the universe the size that it is? It's probably not just God showing off. It's probably has to be the size it is in order for us to exist. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we as human beings have is whether or not there's any other life or sentience in the universe. We do not know how life starts. I mean, you can do the simple answer and say, well, God made it. But that's like saying, why does it rain? Well, God makes it rain. Well, what's the physical process? Right. How does it happen? And we understand that now with rain. That does not negate God's involvement in it. Mm-hmm. That's a mistake a lot of Christians make, the thought being that if you understand it and can explain it, then God's not there anymore.
Right.
That's a faulty way of thinking. That is, God does not require mystery in order to exist or to accomplish what he does. And it's not a reasonable answer to say just God did it. That's the lazy answer.
I tell kids that it's magic. If I don't understand how, they'll be like, how does my computer get images up onto the screen? And I just say it's magic.
Yes.
It's little elves that live inside your Chromebook, and they paint it up there, and they're super fast.
Yes. And for those of us that are not computer scientists, that's as good as it gets, mm-hmm. because we don't understand.
Yep.
Just because we don't understand how life works and how it starts does not mean that we are not ever going to figure it out. Figuring it out would be useful because that would then tie back into the question of why is the universe as big as it is. It could be that life happening is really difficult. It takes a lot of trial and error, as it were, and so you need a universe this big in order to have it happen once. Just from the odds standpoint. That's one possible explanation for the size of the universe. But not necessarily. That is, we simply don't know. It's also entirely possible that God just wanted to have lots of variety and have lots of different iterations of civilizations and people and living things. It is an awful lot of real estate out there. Mm-hmm. I mean, until the last 30 years, we could only speculate about whether or not there were planets around other stars. We've now confirmed that there are, and we actually know of far more planets outside our solar system than within it. I think there's over 4,000 known exoplanets at this point. And from a statistical standpoint now, it's quite obvious that there are more planets than there are stars in the sky, which makes sense. I mean, our sun has 8 of them, or 9, or however many, depending on how you want to count all the little balls that are out there. Whether you want to call them dwarf planets or regular planets.
Pluto.
Yes, that's a source of contention.
The year that Pluto was determined to be a dwarf planet and was kind of voted out of the solar system, my students thought we blew it up. I said, no, we didn't blow it up. We just aren't counting it as a planet anymore.
We're categorizing it differently.
Yes.
Because as we've learned more about our solar system and the stuff that's out there, we realize that Pluto is part of a different category of things. And so It's like back in the days, in biblical times, they looked at things that flew and they classified all of them as birds. Now we don't count bats as being birds, nor do we count dolphins and whales as fish. But prior to our greater understanding of these creatures, they were all things that swam in the ocean, and so they were all categorized the same. As we've learned more, we've changed the categories, and so that's what's happened with the outer solar system. Pluto fits better with other Kuiper Belt objects than it does with the planets of the inner solar system, and so that's the reason for the recategorization. It was a bit sloppily done and leaves room for improvement. The other place where I think we're going to have to make another adjustment is with our definition of moon. Jupiter now has, 72 moons? The difficulty, though, is that quite a number of those things are little tiny things, maybe a mile in diameter. Should those really be classified as moons, like our moon or Titan or Europa, which are quite large? Should we categorize them as something else?
My understanding was that moon is defined as something that goes around a planet.
Exactly, just like planet was defined as something that goes around the sun.
Right.
But because it was just...
So if
we might want to recategorize things, come up with a different term for the smaller ones.
But if it's going around Jupiter, it should still be a moon. I mean, is there like a legal limit on how many moons you can own?
No, it just becomes cumbersome, and so you might want to redefine what they are.
Mini moons.
Yes, mini moons or something like that. Come up with a different term. Another place it becomes fuzzy thinking in terms of our solar system is classifying things as asteroids or comets, because essentially they're very similar objects. The difference in the current categorization is a comet is something that outgasses when it gets closer to the sun, and asteroids don't. On the other hand, comets, if they come around the sun often enough, they get rid of all their volatiles and they stop outgassing, and so then they magically become asteroids. So again, it's a bit of a fuzzy demarcation. That is, Halley's Comet, after it's been around enough times, will be Halley's asteroid.
I thought it was Halley's.
Or Halley's.
Oh.
I think Halley's is the proper pronunciation.
Okay.
Just when I was a little kid, we called it Halley's.
Yeah, and that's what I called it, Halley's Comet, but then I heard it was Halley's.
Yeah, Halley's is, it's like Carnegie versus Carnegie.
Right.
It is, you get used to growing up calling that person by one name, then you learn later that no, that's not how it was pronounced.
Everybody and his brother was mispronouncing it.
Yes. So, and having a last name that's easy to mispronounce, it works. But as we learn more about the universe around us, we gain insight into God. One of the things that you learn, for instance, thinking about rain again, is we come to understand how God does some of the things he does. And some people may be disturbed by that thought, that we can understand God, but then they forget what Special Revelation tells us, which is that humanity has been created in the image of God. And that God himself tells us at the Tower of Babel incident that
it's one of our children that
is your mom.
Oh. Calling you?
Who knows? I think she remembered that we're doing this.
Yeah.
She looked at the time suddenly. She's normally one of the people watching us.
Yes.
Anyway, God makes a comment on the human race building the Tower of Babel, that if they've begun to do this, then nothing will be outside the realm of their abilities to accomplish.
We're a bunch of determined 3-year-olds.
Yes, we are. But it makes sense because we've been created in the image and likeness of God, which means God, and he gave us dominion over the universe that he created, and so it makes sense that we would be able to figure it out and be able to do God-like things. I mean, Jesus himself told his disciples that you'll do greater works than me. So it is an interesting state of affairs that we find ourselves in. There are things that we can accomplish now that in the time of Jesus, for instance, they were miracles and nobody knew how to accomplish such things. And yet we look at some of them and we say, well, that's something we could do.
Mm-hmm.
That is, virgin births are not particularly difficult anymore. They happen or can happen quite easily. We have the technology. God was more technologically advanced than we were in that point, but now we have matched. So,
although our way is much more expensive.
yes, our way is more expensive.
So we are not
and
really
requires
matched.
more instrumentation than
I
what he
wouldn't
used.
say we're really matched.
Yeah, but at least we
But-
have a basic sense of how it can be done.
Right.
And we can do it. It's just we do it rather we're at a primitive level
Yes.
technologically there, but at least we've gotten to that point. It's kind of like a Model T is an automobile. It's just that by modern standards, it's rather primitive.
Right. It's not a Model 3.
No, it is not a Model 3.
He's sacked out.
Yes.
He keeps twitching.
So, but there are all sorts of things about the universe that we don't have answers for, and there are many things in the Bible that we wonder about and don't have answers for.
And that needs to be okay.
Yes.
There are Christians that think you have to have all the answers. And it needs
And
to
that
be
their
okay that we don't
answers
have them.
and that their answers are automatically correct because they've got it all figured out.
Right.
Essentially, if you have a person that says
Sorry.
they have all the answers and they've
couldn't
got
help
it all figured out, you should be a little bit leery.
Right.
Because one of the key things for us as human beings is to recognize just how limited we actually are. And that makes us uncomfortable. Again, because we've been created in the image and likeness of God, and so we feel like we should be able to do anything, because God can do anything. But we're not at that place, and we don't have those capabilities. We're not immortal, and so that right there is a big limiting factor on us. Socrates is quoted as saying that he was the wisest of men because he knew nothing. And if you want to be wise as a human being, you really do need to get to that place. Because the more that you learn, the more that you understand, the more you realize that you don't understand much and you don't know much. Because you learn just how much there is to learn, just how much there is to understand, just how complicated everything is. And you realize that your simple answers will not work. They're not sufficient. We like simple answers.
Mm-hmm.
We want to have a nice checklist and be able to say, okay, I know this, I know this, I know this, I've got it all. And you sadly have people that you work with that have not learned anything since college because they think they've learned it all, and so they don't need to learn anything more. And so they have an answer for everything, whether or not it fits or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a sad place to be.
Especially since knowledge keeps advancing too. We not only do we know more things and know about how more things work, but we also have that knowledge at our fingertips now, and which we didn't have back then. And then as knowledge develops, like the mRNA thing, that's like pretty new. And well, think about DNA. Mm-hmm. When the O.J. Simpson trial happened, DNA was so new that the jurors didn't really understand how precise DNA was. They thought that the DNA being there meant that O.J., like it was like 1 in a million, whatever the number was, that he was the killer. It doesn't mean that. It means out of 1 million people, he's the only one that could be the killer, which is they're direct opposites pretty much.
They interpret it.
And we understand that now. So when someone says, well, the DNA evidence shows that it's this person,
it shows it's not that person.
Right. And we accept that now as truth because now we understand how it works.
Yes, on a popular level.
What I think is fascinating is when I watch Dateline and things like that, because I'm a true crime buff, that they have DNA samples from before DNA was a thing. Now, in some crimes, like in the 1960s and stuff, they didn't collect any DNA. They might have something in evidence that might have some DNA
if they have
remaining.
Blood, if they have blood, or if they have hair follicles or any of those things, they can get DNA out of it.
Right.
If it hasn't degraded too much.
Right. So, but anyway, it's fascinating to me how early on they were collecting
things
for
that had DNA.
Right. And
they didn't realize they could use it for
right.
that.
Right. So.
See, one of the things the general revelation gives us, which you don't necessarily get from the biblical materials as clearly, is exactly the huge gap that exists between us and God.
Mm-hmm.
It is what you gain from the universe around us is the humility and the sense of, wow, I really don't know very much. And I can never know very much because I'm just this little tiny thing on this little tiny planet, one tiny planet circling one star out of 400 billion in the Milky Way galaxy of billions and billions of other galaxies spread across enormous different distances that I can't even fathom. Yeah, I don't know much.
Mm-hmm.
Never can.
But let's talk about eternity. So when we were created to live forever, to not die, and just hang it up on her. You can message her.
Yeah, continue.
Anyway, we were created not to die, so my speculation is that the universe is huge because we were supposed to spend our lives exploring the universe, and if you live forever, you have a lot of time to fill, and so there would be time to create ways of traveling through the universe and studying the universe and things like that. So, but with eternal life, we will have that ability to explore like forever.
Yes, you have the time.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'm always glad when I find out that like a singer I like or an actor I like or something like that was a believer, because then it's like, oh, maybe we'll have some good TV shows in heaven. Maybe we'll have some good movies in heaven. Because what else are you going to do at that time? You should create your art and, do whatever you're doing here. But
I mean, even in entertainment, if you go back to the movie It's a Wonderful Life, and Clarence makes the comment, you should see the book that Mark Twain is writing right now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So,
yeah. And see, that's the other thing, and people don't want to think in these terms, but, we describe God as being all-knowing, all-powerful, that He's everywhere present. It should raise questions for you. How is it that He is those things?
Mm-hmm.
Now, being an eternal being and not bound by time, then you can see a mechanism for Him knowing everything and being everywhere. Is that the case? Is that how it is that He's all-knowing, or is it just He is innately, by virtue of being God, all-knowing, or did He come to know everything? And you even have hints biblically in that regard when God is talking to Abraham after He's told Abraham that He's going to have a son in the following year, and Sarah laughed and he laughed and they didn't fully believe it. And then God tells them that he's going down to Sodom and Gomorrah to find out whether it's as bad as the report that he's gotten. And so that raises questions then in your mind, or at least it should. Is this just phenomenological language, God talking in such a way that Abraham would make sense of it? Or does it give us a hint of the process that God goes through in knowing everything? Don't know. But we shouldn't shy away or be afraid of questions that some Christians might want to say, well, you're a heretic, or you're stupid, or you're whatever. That is, again, we know remarkably little. And it's not invalid or unreasonable to ask questions about mechanisms, even regarding how God does what he does. What is the mechanism he used? Again, we understand how rain happens. We understand the mechanism God uses to make it happen. That does not negate or lessen the majesty of God. Mm-hmm. Just understanding something does not mean that you have somehow walked into something that you shouldn't have. Some people seem to have a fear of knowledge and understanding, and I don't quite comprehend why. Even particularly given the fact that a lot of those same people are very curious about all sorts of other things. Mm-hmm. But it's like they're afraid of knowing too much about.
There's a phrase about playing God. We shouldn't be playing God.
Yeah, except that God made us to play God,
right.
I would argue. Mm-hmm. That is, we are created in the image and likeness of God. We were given dominion over the earth. And then God himself tells us that,
and we do
anything we imagined to do, we could do.
We do the same with our children.
Yes.
Our grandson has his own little play sink in the kitchen because he wants to do what the big people do. Mm-hmm. And so it's too hazardous for him to be up on the counter.
Right.
So our daughter got him his own little sink that has water in it, and he pours the water in a cup and dumps it down the little drain. Mm-hmm. And all that. And he plays at being a grown-up.
Right. As you wouldn't want your toddler to be driving a car, but once your toddler has turned 16, it's okay for them to learn how to drive a car.
And up until that time, you can buy them one of those little battery-operated ones. They can run over their siblings when they back up and don't look over their shoulder.
Yeah.
Which is why our daughter lost her Barbie Jeep.
Yes.
Thankfully, she's a better driver now and doesn't back up over small children. She would drive over her sisters. They'd be behind her, she'd back up, and there were her sisters, and they would get mowed down.
Yes. Not that it caused too much damage to either them or the Barbie Jeep.
Right.
But they didn't particularly appreciate it.
Yeah, neither did I, because I didn't want crying kids, and I didn't want bruises, because the two little ones were still in foster care, and I had to justify any injuries that they had. And while it's reasonable, it just is easier if they don't have any bruises. Right, it's more paperwork if they have bruises and cuts and scrapes. So I was very diligent about keeping any skin damage from happening because I just didn't want to deal with the paperwork.
Which is remarkably difficult to do with toddlers.
Yes. But I got really fast with ice packs.
Yeah.
I could slap an ice pack just quick as looking at you. Before you know it, there's an ice pack. No bruise.
Yep. So, yeah. Now, what the universe around us should do, one of the things, is help alleviate our sense that mystery indicates the existence of God, while absence of mystery means that God is not there after all. That is a flawed way of thinking. Understanding something does not mean that God's not there or responsible for it. It just means you understand what he's doing. Just like when you're a little toddler, you have no idea how to get your fun noodle.
Pool noodle.
The pool noodle to hit the fan. But your dad can pick you up, and then you can reach it. And then he sets you down, and then you keep trying to figure out how do I...
And you're holding on to the wrong end. So most of the pool noodle is on the floor, but you're swinging this little stub of it, our grandson did that this week.
Yes.
They came over and we had pool noodle wars in the living room. It kind of was rather spontaneous. And then we started playing with the ceiling fan, like poking it in the ceiling fan. And Luca wanted to do the same, but he was holding the noodle, and like here was the top end of it right here with all this other pool noodle sticking out. If he had moved it up more, he would have come closer to hitting it.
Yes.
I don't know that he would have, but he would have come closer.
Yes.
But he doesn't have that
But his
level
dad
of
is
experience.
no less his dad.
Right.
Whether or not Luca can understand how his dad can reach the fan with the pool
Right.
noodle.
Exactly.
And same thing for us in relationship with God. The fact that we don't understand how he does something at the moment does not mean that if we figure it out, that somehow he's less God than he was before.
Right.
So people make some really odd decisions regarding how things work and who God is. And again, that's one of the things that I think life, the universe, and everything is helpful in, is helping you to keep perspective on who God is and what he does.
I think that people view God more as a concept
Well,
than as a person per
Yeah,
se.
that's true. And there's also, this is kind of the atheist attack, that God is somehow this magic sky being that does things. And see, that's a false way of thinking of it. But a lot of Christians fall into that way of thinking, and so the atheist attack works. But it's actually a straw man argument, because that's not the God that we see biblically, and it's certainly not the God that we would see in the universe at large.
Right.
He is not a magic sky genie or a magic wizard,
Right.
because it's not magic.
Exactly. We're about 3.5 minutes from being done.
Okay?
So now the plan for next week, the plan is that we will be here. So watch for notifications. It is time for us to get our hair done. So mine's all fuzzed up now because I was leaning back against the green screen. I was stretching out my leg.
Yeah, this isn't really there.
Library. See that? Read the books. Read the book. Read that book and read that book right there. Anyway, it's a green screen behind us. So I was leaning back because the way the dog was laying, it was easier to hold him if I leaned back a bit. Plus, I was stretching out my legs. But anyway, why was I saying that? Oh, because my hair is a mess. Yeah. So anyway,
All things being equal, we should be back.
Yes.
In time.
I've asked my hairdresser for as early an appointment as we can get. We don't have any tag-alongs with us this time. It'll just be Robin and I, and Oreo always goes with us, but she doesn't groom Oreo. He has his own hairdresser. So our goal is to be back next week. And what's the topic for next week?
It should be on the
Let's
page.
see.
Next.
Seymour. I just clicked on the person's name.
Are we more than just meat robots?
Oh, are we just meat robots? Okay, so that should hopefully be a funny one. And so if we are not here, watch the notifications. They'll just be bumped to the following week. So, or actually not the following week, because that one is Labor Day weekend.
Oh, yeah, so we wouldn't be
Yeah,
here.
so-
September 4th, I'll have to update.
Yeah.
So September 4th, we actually won't be here.
And there are 2 days, well, at least one in September. The other one in September may have gotten moved to October. We're babysitting our grandson, and we do that down at our daughter's house, and so we won't be on then either. So just if you check the schedule on the Mirror Darkly Facebook page, that is sort of accurate when he gets up to updating it.
Yes.
When he gets to updating it. So he forgets to put in holidays. So, but anyway, September 4th we will be at Knott's Berry Farm. So if you want to come see us, that's where we'll be.
Yeah.
But anyway, so hopefully we will see you guys next week, and maybe it'll be a little bit more lively discussion about meat robots. And I know a couple people that would gross them out. And anyway, but we'll be here. Oreo will be here. He'll sleep through it all, which is what he did this, how he kept twitching in my arms. So, but please subscribe on YouTube, or follow on, or like us on Facebook, so that you get notifications when we go live and when we post something about whether we're going live or not. because
Yes.
sometimes emergencies happen too.
Yep.
So anyway, you guys have a good week, and we'll see you next Saturday at 4 Pacific time.
Yep.